is a little bit different from how Truman approaches his presidency. Because when you think about the Truman presidency and what he's like as a president, you don't see a guy who is this firm against communism being this aggressive, or being this kind of person in his presidency. And let's talk about what I mean by this kind of president. When Truman takes the lead as president of the United States, he presents his own program, and he calls it the Fair Deal, right? So Theodore Roosevelt had the Square Deal. Franklin Roosevelt had the New Deal. Truman has the Fair Deal, okay? And when we talk about why he calls it the Fair Deal, let me tell you what he is doing. The Fair Deal is expanding on the New Deal. The Fair Deal reaches people that the New Deal programs did not, including African Americans, right? That includes African Americans. And here's why that's important. Harry Truman, and I mentioned this in the last lecture, but I'm going to reemphasize this now because it's important. Harry Truman is a Southerner. Granted, Missouri is a border state, but it's still considered Southern. And Harry Truman grew up in and around segregation. He understood how African Americans were treated. He saw it with his own eyes. He grew up hearing the language that was used. And Harry Truman is going to be the country's first real civil rights president. Now, Franklin Roosevelt makes some headway. He does make significant leaps towards connecting with African Americans, but it's going to be Harry Truman that actually makes the difference, okay? And one of the ways that he does it is through the Fair Deal. Truman recognizes out the gate that the New Deal has a lot of discrimination issues. And also, Truman says the Fair Deal should do the things that the New Deal didn't. So in addition to helping those Americans that weren't helped by the New Deal, he also says, we need to really think about health insurance. And what he does is he introduces, for the first time, a national health insurance program. Roosevelt had talked about it. He had presented the idea initially when he was talking about the benefits of helping Americans across the country after the war, but it was sort of dismissed. So Truman decides to be much more aggressive about it, to talk about a national health insurance program. Now, this is what I need you to know. Truman is by and large considered, especially in comparison to Franklin Roosevelt, he is the more progressive Democrat. He is the more liberal, he is the more progressive, more forward-thinking Democrat than Roosevelt was, which is completely unexpected because he's the Southerner who's taking a super aggressive tactic against communists, right? So when we talk about how he is approaching domestic policies, this is a guy who takes an entirely different approach in his vision for America. So this is going to be especially challenging for him, though, because when he talks about this idea of, expanding health insurance or even building upon the New Deal, this is going to be especially troubling to Republicans because Republicans basically say, okay, we don't need another Franklin Roosevelt. That's actually the last thing that we want. Instead, what Republicans start to do is they start to campaign against the idea of a Truman building on and expanding on a Roosevelt legacy, right? And they actually do so with some success. But keep in mind, Harry Truman is not Franklin Roosevelt. He doesn't have Roosevelt's charisma. And listen, Harry Truman doesn't have an Eleanor Roosevelt. I mean, no offense to Bess Truman, but Bess Truman is no Eleanor Roosevelt. So if you don't have Franklin Roosevelt's charisma and you don't have Eleanor Roosevelt by your side, you're kind of working at a disadvantage here. So Republicans start to push for things to make sure that Truman is working with some limitations. The first thing that they do, especially as they start to make gains in Congress and in the Senate, is they push for the ratification of the 22nd Amendment. And the 22nd Amendment is what limits presidents to 2 terms. Okay, because immediately they said, absolutely not. We're not doing another Franklin Roosevelt again. Absolutely not. Now, would they have the same ideas if they were Republican? You know what? Probably. I think they would make the same argument. Maybe not as energetically, but they would still make the same argument. Now, the other thing that Republicans successfully do is they start to undo some of the New Deal policies that Roosevelt put into place. So they start to cut funding to different programs. A lot of those, the short-term programs had already come to an end anyway. So you don't have the WPA anymore. You don't have the CCC anymore. But some of the other programs start to see budget cuts in a lot of ways. And when Truman presents his national health insurance idea, and when Truman presents the idea of expanding Social Security, this Republican Congress laughs in his face and basically says, absolutely not, that's never going to happen. Not with us, right? And so Truman has a really hard time of really accomplishing the things that he wants to accomplish as a progressive Democrat in terms of legislation. However, he does make some progress in different ways, especially concerning civil rights. So Truman is president at a time where the entire country is going through a tremendous amount of social change. And we need to be mindful of this because one of the things that you need to know about things like civil rights is that a lot of times it happens in conjunction with other events. It doesn't always happen in isolated moments, right? There are other things that are taking place. And so in the late 1940s, you have a guy like Jackie Robinson who is integrating baseball, Major League Baseball. And it's not an easy process for him. He is ridiculed from the stands. So he goes through a tremendous amount of pressure and struggle. And then he becomes this, eventually he becomes this admired athlete. But it takes a long time. And clearly, though, it is a moment, right? It's a pivotal moment. And one of the things that I want you to remember is that cultural moments like this will have impact on politics, will have impact on how presidents lead, on how Congress will make its decisions. Truman is going to be responsible for Executive Order 9981. Executive Order 9981 is the executive order that will help to, or 9980. I'm so sorry. When we talk about 9981, it desegregates the military in addition to multiple other things. So let's talk about those multiple other things. 9981 desegregates the military to the offense of many of Truman's already existing critics. But there are a lot of people who make the argument that the military is not the place for you to conduct your social experiments, that the military has to have a certain level of discipline and structure, and it's not used for things like integration. This is not where you test integration. And Truman, Truman basically says pshaw to that. A lot of the reason why is because he points to the fact that we are supposedly fighting to be this beacon of freedom to freedom-loving peoples, and we're doing it in we're doing it in segregated units. And how does that make any kind of sense, right? He points to the fact that thousands of African American soldiers fought honorably in World War I and World War II, but they had to fight subject to second-class treatment because of the color of their skin. Executive Order 9981 is a part of a larger umbrella effort that Truman puts together. And this umbrella effort is known as the Committee on Equality of Treatment and Opportunity in the Armed Services. The Committee on Equality of Treatment and Opportunity in the Armed Services. And essentially, what he realizes is from the committee's investigation on how the military treats its soldiers, especially during and after World War II, it's the recognition and the understanding that these soldiers and then veterans deserved much better and much more, right? One of the things that you have to understand about Truman is that his approach to race is quite forward thinking. And it doesn't just end with, the military. So, for example, when we talk about his approach to civil rights in general, Truman sort of thinks about civil rights and American society at large. And one of the things that he pushes to do is he starts to reach out to civil rights organizations. For example, he will be the first president to speak to the NAACP, and he's invited to speak, and he speaks very openly and plainly about the importance of understanding the values of civil rights. He is also a president responsible for establishing the President's Committee on Civil Rights. The President's Committee on Civil Rights looks at every aspect of American society and where discrimination takes place and how it impacts people of color, and especially Black people, right? So they're looking at employment, they're looking at housing, they're looking at education. He is the first president to ever do something like this. The reason why all of this is important is because two things happen as a result. One, when we talk about the impact of Truman's Presidential Committee on Civil Rights, or President's Committee on Civil Rights, and the desegregation of the military, he does it to the criticism not just of Republicans. There is criticism coming from his own party. Remember, a part of the reason why Roosevelt limits the New Deal programs so that African Americans don't have access to them is because Southern Democrats threaten him and say that they won't support his programs, right? Truman says, screw you, I'm going to pursue it anyway. I'm going to find a way around the Southern Democrat vote, and I am going to investigate civil rights policies, right? So even though the fair deal doesn't come to pass in the way that he wants, right? Those programs don't get to reach out to African Americans the way that he wants. He is able to issue executive orders. He is able to create committees that study and publicly publish the results of those studies that show how wide the discrepancies are. And as a result, Southern Democrats are outraged. What makes it even worse is in 1948 is a presidential election year, and Truman is running for the presidency. When Truman runs for the presidency on his own merit, a part of the Democratic National Convention, as it is for every party convention, is to establish the party platform, right? What are the issues that you are focusing on for this particular election? What are you going to campaign on? And mainstream Democrats decided that they were going to include civil rights as a part of their platform for the first time ever in the history of their party. And keep in mind, that party has been around since 1830. Okay, so this is the oldest political party in America, and now they are adding civil rights to their platform. Thanks in great deal to Harry Truman, but also thanks in part to Eleanor Roosevelt, because we got to give her a shout out too. So Southern Democrats are outraged. This is done over their protest, and what they do instead is they form their own party, because of course they do. You see their poster there at the bottom, the States' Rights Democrats. The States' Rights Party is the party they established. And what they decide to do is they decide to run their own candidate, a third-party candidate, in the 1948 election. Their party convention is hosted right here in Oklahoma City in 1948. And the guys that you see there, the guy on the left is Strom Thurmond, who was a senator from South Carolina. In the party platform, they talk about states' rights, what states' rights they're trying to preserve, and a lot of that is going to include things like forced race mixing. Those are the kind of phrases that they use in their actual party platform. A side note, I just want to add that Strom Thurmond, it was discovered after he died several years ago, that he had actually fathered a black daughter. So mumble, mumble. But anyway, when we talk about this States' Rights Party, the purpose of this third party was not to create a long-lasting party. They know this is not going to work long-term. They know that third parties don't win in American politics. What they're trying to do is take away votes from Truman. What they're trying to do is take away any kind of momentum from the Democratic Party. That doesn't quite happen the way that they want, right? These Democrats, these Southern Democrats, have often been known as the Dixiecrats, right? And they've been known as the Dixiecrats for a long time. And for a long time, Southern Democrats had held the power in the Democratic Party. They were the leaders of the party and had been for decades, right? But by the time we get to a post-war America, the power had shifted. Franklin Roosevelt shifts the power of the party to where it's not just in the South, it's also in the North, and it's out West as well. Franklin Roosevelt helps to spread the Democratic influence, where more people are now registered with the Democratic Party and identifying with a more progressive platform and progressive politics. And so the Dixiecrats don't hold that influence anymore. So in the end, what happens is this. States' Rights Party wins South Carolina, as you can see here. South Carolina and 1 vote from Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, so all the states that you could expect, I guess. And everything in blue belongs to Harry S. Truman. For a while there, they were a little bit nervous. The Truman ticket had been a little bit nervous, especially looking at the East Coast, where New York and Pennsylvania had all gone to, which were big items, right? Big tickets, had gone to the Republicans. And in fact, there's a famous picture of Truman where he's holding a newspaper with the headline, Dewey defeats Truman, because newspaper editors decided to go ahead and just publish their newspapers with that headline. But what they failed to do is wait until the west coast of the country had actually counted their ballots. And that's where Truman gets a big push. And in the end, he actually wins the election in a huge way. It points to an America that is thinking a little differently, right? Let me also add this before I move on. In 1948, this is where you see the official shift for party affiliation. While Dixiecrats are going to stay affiliated with the Democratic Party for this election and maybe a couple of more, they start voting more and more with the Republican Party because they identify with the Republican Party more. And this is also where African Americans start voting more regularly with the Democratic Party. I just want to put that out there. So if anyone ever asks you or tells you, well, the Democrats were the party of the slaveholders, they're the ones who seceded from the Union, all of that is true, all of that is correct. But then there's a shift, there's a switcheroony that happens, and that happens during the Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman era. Right? So Franklin Roosevelt is partly responsible for it, and then Harry Truman really pushes it over the edge. And this is where you can really see it in action. Okay.